What if the greatest secret humanity ever buried was not hidden in the stars, but sealed beneath our own feet? For as long as we can remember, we have been taught to look upward for salvation, toward heavens, skies, distant realms of light. We built temples that reached toward the clouds, crafted myths of ascent, and imagined truth as something far away, somewhere else. Yet beneath this upward obsession lies a quieter, more unsettling question. One ancient cultures understood instinctively, and modern humanity has almost completely forgotten. The earth itself has always whispered a different story. Not as a planet of dirt and stone alone, but as a living symbol of depth, memory, and concealed wisdom. Across civilizations separated by oceans and millennia, humanity returned again and again to the same strange idea that something sacred lies below. Not merely buried treasures or lost cities, but knowledge, truth, origin. The hollow earth myth did not arise once or twice. It erupted everywhere, as if seeded into human consciousness itself. Modern culture laughs at the hollow earth as fantasy, conspiracy, or failed science. And yet, the persistence of the myth refuses to die. Even when stripped of literal credibility, it continues to haunt our imagination. This alone should give us pause. Myths that survive the collapse of belief systems are never accidental. They remain because they point to something deeper than facts. They endure because they encode meaning, not information. What if the hollow earth was never meant to be physical? What if ancient people were not describing tunnels and inner suns, but inner states, maps of consciousness disguised as cosmology? In a time before psychology, before neuroscience, before language capable of describing inner experience, humanity turned inward using symbol, story, and sacred geography. The earth became the body, the descent became the journey, the core became the truth. To descend is terrifying. Descent means leaving the surface, the masks, the noise, the roles, the identities. Descent means entering darkness without guarantees. That is why modern spirituality prefers ascent. Ascension feels clean, bright, safe. Descent feels dangerous. Yet every genuine transformation across myth and history begins the same way. Not by rising, but by going down. This is why the hollow earth myth feels forbidden. It threatens the narrative that enlightenment is escape. It suggests instead that truth requires confrontation with memory, shadow, and forgotten knowing. It implies that the divine was never lost in the heavens, but buried beneath layers of fear, trauma, and imposed belief. And perhaps most unsettling of all, it suggests that we already carry the map. The earth, in this sense, is not a prison. It is a vault, a layered archive of consciousness. The surface world is where we survive. The depths are where we remember. And at the center, if we dare to approach it, something ancient waits. Not emptiness, not darkness, but fullness. Before we can understand what lies at the core, we must first dismantle the lie that the hollow earth was ever meant to be taken literally. Because the greatest mistake modern minds make is assuming ancient people thought like us. They did not. They thought in symbols, and symbols were never lies. They were keys. The modern world suffers from a particular blindness. It assumes that truth must be literal to be real. If something cannot be measured, photographed, or excavated, it is dismissed as imagination. But ancient civilizations did not divide reality this way. To them, the inner world was not less real than the outer. It was more real. And the hollow earth myth belongs to that symbolic intelligence we have forgotten how to read. When ancient texts spoke of hidden realms beneath the ground, they were not issuing geological claims. They were describing inward journeys using the only language available to them, mythic geography. Caves, underworlds, inner suns, subterranean cities, these were metaphors for states of awareness inaccessible to the surface mind. To mistake these stories for failed science is to misunderstand their purpose entirely. Consider how often sacred spaces were built downward rather than upward. Temples carved into rock, sanctuaries hidden in caves, initiations that required descent into darkness before revelation. These were not accidents of architecture. They were embodiments of philosophy. The initiate did not learn truth by listening. They learned by entering, and entry required going below the surface of the self. Literalism destroys myth because it traps symbol in matter. When modern thinkers argue about whether tunnels exist beneath the earth, they miss the entire transmission. The ancients were not pointing outward, they were pointing inward. The earth was the map because the human being was the territory. The idea of hidden civilizations was never about lost races with advanced technology. It was about hidden aspects of the human psyche, faculties of perception, memory, and intuition sealed off by fear and conditioning. What was called below was simply that which consciousness had repressed, forgotten, or denied. This is why descent is always associated with danger in myth. Not because the underworld is evil, but because the mind resists facing what it has buried. The surface self survives by distraction. The depths demand honesty, and honesty dissolves illusions. That is the real threat. Ancient myth makers encoded psychology long before psychology existed. They understood that wholeness does not come from escape, but integration. The journey inward is not glamorous. It does not offer instant bliss. It offers truth, and truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. The hollow earth, then, is not a place you travel to. It is a state you remember. It is what emerges when surface identity collapses and deeper awareness begins to speak. The inner sun is not a star beneath the crust. It is consciousness itself, radiant when unobstructed by fear and fragmentation. To read the hollow earth myth correctly is to stop asking where it is and start asking why it exists. Because myths do not survive for entertainment. They survive because they are functional. They guide, they initiate, they awaken. And the hollow earth has been calling humanity inward for thousands of years. In the next descent, we will discover that this inward journey is not unique to one culture or one myth, but encoded across the world, wherever humans sought truth beneath appearances. There is a reason every true wisdom tradition begins underground, not in the sky, not in the light, but in darkness. Across cultures that never met, across languages that never touched, the same story repeats. The hero, the god, or the initiate must descend before anything meaningful can be revealed. This pattern is not coincidence. It is instruction. The descent appears everywhere. Underworld journeys, caves of initiation, nights of the soul, tombs before resurrections. These stories were never meant to frighten, they were meant to prepare. Ancient cultures understood something modern spirituality resists: that consciousness cannot mature without passing through its own depths. Light that has never known darkness is fragile. Wisdom that has never faced fear is shallow. The descent is not punishment. it is confrontation. When myth speaks of going below, it is describing the movement of awareness away from surface identity and into the forgotten layers of the self. The underworld is where exiled truths live, memories too painful to hold, desires too dangerous to admit, powers too disruptive for social order. The descent is the moment consciousness turns around and chooses to see what it has been avoiding. This is why the underworld is always guarded. Gates, judges, monsters. These are not external beings, they are inner resistances. Fear, shame, doubt, conditioning. Every seeker meets them. Most turn back. Myths do not hide this. They warn you plainly. This journey will change you, and you may not recognize yourself when you return. Modern culture mislabels this process as pathology. We are taught to medicate dissent, distract from it, or bypass it with affirmations and light language. But the ancients knew better. They knew that what is buried does not disappear. It governs from below. The unexamined depths do not sleep. They shape behavior, belief, and perception silently. The hollow earth myth emerges from this same understanding. The earth becomes the symbolic body of consciousness. The surface world is everyday awareness. The depths are the unconscious, the ancestral, the archetypal. To descend into the earth is to descend into being itself. To journey toward the core is to approach the organizing center of awareness. And here is the paradox ancient myths insist upon. The deeper one goes, the more luminous reality becomes. Darkness is not the opposite of light. It is the veil that conceals it. Every descent myth culminates not in annihilation, but revelation. The initiate returns transformed, carrying something the surface world lacks: gnosis. The hollow earth, seen through this lens, is not a lost world. It is the inner world humanity abandoned when it chose certainty over truth, comfort over wholeness. And yet, the map was never destroyed. It was encoded, preserved in story, symbol, and sacred descent. To understand what waits at the core, we must now turn to the tradition that preserved this inner cosmology, most explicitly, Gnosticism. Gnosticism begins where most religions refuse to look. It does not ask you to believe, it asks you to remember. And remembrance, in the Gnostic worldview, is not achieved by obedience or assent, but by inward awakening. This is why Gnosticism was always dangerous to systems of control. It placed the divine not above humanity, but within it. In Gnostic thought, reality is layered. What we see is not what is. The material world is not evil, but incomplete, a surface expression of something deeper and more whole. This surface reality functions like a veil, filtering perception and fragmenting awareness. To mistake it for totality is the fundamental error Gnosticism sought to correct. At the heart of Gnostic cosmology lies the idea of fullness, the state of undivided being, wholeness, and knowing. This fullness was never described as a distant heaven. It was described as an inner condition, a state of consciousness remembered rather than reached. To enter it, one does not escape the world, one penetrates it. This is where the hollow earth symbol aligns perfectly with Gnostic wisdom. The inner world is not elsewhere. It is beneath appearances, beneath belief, beneath identity. The descent through layers of reality mirrors the descent through layers of consciousness. Each layer strips illusion, each descent removes distortion. What remains is not belief, but knowing. Gnosticism taught that humanity carries a divine spark, an inner light buried beneath layers of forgetting. This spark is not activated through worship, but through awareness, through the courage to turn inward, through descent. The so-called fall was never a moral failure. It was a loss of orientation, a forgetting of origin. From this perspective, the hollow earth is not a myth about the planet. It is a myth about the soul. The inner sun at the core is consciousness itself, radiant when unobstructed. The hidden realms are inner states sealed off by fear and false authority. The journey inward is not metaphorical, it is experiential. This is why Gnostic texts speak in paradox, symbol, and poetry. They were never meant to be read literally. They were meant to activate memory, to destabilize surface certainty, to provoke recognition. Gnosis does not come from accumulation of facts. It comes from sudden clarity, like light breaking through stone. When humanity externalized God, it lost access to the inner world. Authority replaced intimacy. Doctrine replaced experience. The divine was moved upward and outward, while the inner depths were labeled dangerous, sinful, or deceptive. The hollow earth, like Gnosticism itself, was buried, not because it was false, but because it was powerful. To reclaim the inner world is to reclaim sovereignty, and sovereignty begins not in rebellion, but in remembrance. The next descent will take us deeper still, into the earth as mirror and the soul as hidden cosmos. Ancient civilizations did not separate the human being from the cosmos. They understood instinctively that the world outside and the world within were reflections of the same structure. The earth was not merely inhabited by humanity, it mirrored humanity. Its layers, pressures, and hidden fires were symbolic expressions of inner reality, encoded into the planet itself as a living map. The surface of the earth corresponds to surface consciousness. This is the realm of identity, language, routine, and survival. It is where roles are played and masks are worn. Life here is necessary, but shallow. The surface mind reacts. It adapts. It seeks safety and approval. Most human beings never move beyond this layer, mistaking functionality for truth. Beneath the surface lies the first descent, the realm of memory and emotion. This is where buried experiences reside, especially those deemed unacceptable or dangerous. Like tectonic plates, these memories press against one another under immense pressure. When ignored, they produce eruptions. When acknowledged, they become sources of power. Ancient myths placed monsters here for a reason. This is where the unintegrated self lives. Deeper still is the mantle, the domain of archetype, instinct, and ancestral imprint. This layer does not belong solely to the individual. It carries the weight of lineage, culture, and collective trauma. It is here that humanity's oldest patterns reside, shaping belief long before conscious thought. The ancients knew that to reach the core, one must pass through what is inherited as well as what is seen. At the center is not destruction, but coherence. Ancient traditions described this as the sacred fire, the inner sun, the hidden light. Modern science calls it molten, violent, unstable, but symbolically, the core represents the organizing principle of being. Consciousness in its unified state, the place where fragmentation collapses into wholeness. The Earth's pressure mirrors the psychological pressure required for transformation. Diamonds are formed only under immense weight. So too is wisdom. This is why descent feels unbearable at times. It compresses the ego. It dissolves false narratives. It demands surrender of identity in exchange for truth. The hollow earth myth points to this core, not as a refuge, but as a revelation. What waits at the center is not escape from life, but clarity within it. The inner world is not separate from the outer, it informs it. Those who touch the core return changed, able to live on the surface without being owned by it. When humanity lost its relationship with depth, it lost its relationship with itself. The earth was reduced to resource. The soul was reduced to function. The sacred mirror shattered, and yet the reflection remains, waiting for those willing to look below. Knowledge that turns inward is the most dangerous knowledge of all. It does not require permission. It cannot be regulated. It produces individuals who are internally anchored rather than externally controlled. This is why inner cosmology was never simply forgotten. It was actively buried. As civilizations centralized power, spirituality was externalized. Authority migrated upward into heavens, hierarchies, and institutions. The divine was removed from direct experience and placed behind intermediaries. What had once been a personal descent became a prescribed ascent, and ascent, when controlled, is easier to govern. Inner exploration was reframed as rebellion. Descent was labeled sinful. Darkness was equated with evil rather than depth. This was not a misunderstanding, it was strategy. A population disconnected from its inner world is easier to shape, easier to frighten, easier to direct. The soul without depth seeks substitutes in ideology, consumption, and identity. Gnostic wisdom was among the first casualties of this shift. Its insistence on personal knowing threatened every external authority. If the divine spark lives within, then no institution owns salvation. If truth is remembered rather than granted, then obedience loses its leverage. So the inner world was declared unreliable, deceptive, dangerous. Myths that once functioned as maps were stripped of meaning or turned into superstition. Symbol was flattened into story. Story was dismissed as fantasy. The hollow earth became absurd because its inner message was no longer readable. Humanity lost symbolic literacy, and with it, access to its own depths. Modern materialism completed the erasure. Only what could be measured was declared real. Consciousness became a byproduct. Depth became pathology. Descent became something to avoid at all costs. And yet, the hunger for inner truth never disappeared. It went underground, just like the myths themselves. This is why suppressed knowledge always resurfaces in distorted forms. Conspiracy, obsession, fantasy, and fixation are symptoms of something trying to re-emerge without a language. When symbolic truths are denied, they return wearing costumes. The fascination with hollow earth in modern times is not stupidity. It is misdirected memory. Humanity stands at a threshold again. The old structures are cracking. External authority is losing credibility. The surface world no longer satisfies. Something deeper is calling. The suppression is weakening. Not because power has become kinder, but because consciousness is becoming harder to contain. To reclaim inner cosmology is not to reject the world, but to re-enter it with depth, and depth changes everything. The next descent will show why this ancient call is returning now, and how the inner world is beginning to stir once more. Every suppressed truth returns, but never politely. When something essential is buried for too long, it does not re-emerge as wisdom first. It re-emerges as obsession. This is why the hollow earth has resurfaced in modern times, not as philosophy, but as fixation. Something ancient is pressing upward through a culture that has forgotten how to interpret itself. The modern fascination with hollow earth theories should not be mocked. Ridicule misses the signal. Beneath the surface-level claims of tunnels and hidden civilizations lies a deeper impulse, a collective intuition that reality is incomplete as we've been taught to see it. People feel, viscerally, that something vital has been withheld. They just lack the symbolic language to articulate what it is. We live in an age of surface saturation. Information everywhere, meaning nowhere. The external world has become loud, fast, and shallow, while the inner world has been neglected almost entirely. When inner depth is denied, consciousness searches for it externally. What cannot be accessed inwardly is projected outward. This is why myths return disguised as conspiracies. The mind knows something is missing long before it knows what that something is. In earlier eras, this hunger was guided by initiation, myth, and inward training. Today, it is fed by algorithms, speculation, and sensationalism. The longing is real. The expression is distorted. But distortion itself is a sign of pressure from below. The resurgence of hollow earth fascination coincides with a broader collapse of trust in external authority. Institutions once seen as absolute now appear hollow themselves. Narratives feel scripted, systems feel mechanical. In this vacuum, the psyche begins to turn inward again, even if it does not yet know how. This is the danger and the opportunity of our moment. Without symbolic grounding, the return to depth can fragment into fantasy. But with proper orientation, it can become initiation. The myths are not resurfacing to be believed literally, they are resurfacing to be read correctly. The hollow earth returns now because humanity has reached the limits of surface consciousness. Progress without depth produces alienation. Knowledge without wisdom produces anxiety. Technology without integration produces disconnection. The psyche, like the earth, demands balance, or it erupts. This is why the call feels urgent. Not dramatic, urgent. Something in the human being remembers that truth does not descend from above. It rises from within. And the next step is not belief, but entry. The greatest mistake a seeker can make is turning inward with the same mentality used to conquer the outer world. The inner earth is not accessed through force, fantasy, or obsession. It does not open to those who chase visions or demand revelation. It opens to those who slow down enough to listen. Entering the inner world begins with orientation, not technique. The question is not, how do I go inward? But, am I willing to stay with what arises? Most people are not. They flee discomfort instantly. They fill silence. They distract from sensation. The surface mind survives by movement. The depths reveal themselves only in stillness. Contemplation is the first descent, not analysis, not imagination, simply sustained attention without interference. When attention stops moving outward, layers begin to loosen. Thoughts lose urgency. Sensations become vivid. Memory surfaces uninvited. This is not regression. It is excavation. Myth becomes a tool at this stage, not a belief. Reading descent stories slowly, reflectively, allows the psyche to mirror itself safely. The underworld journey becomes a container for inner experience. This is why myths were shared orally and ritually. They created maps so travelers would not panic when the terrain shifted. Silence is the true threshold. Not silence as absence of sound, but silence as absence of reaction. In this space, the inner world begins to reorganize itself. Insights emerge not as answers, but as clarity. You do not see the core, you feel alignment with it. There will be moments of fear. This is natural. Fear signals proximity to truth that threatens identity. The task is not to overcome fear, but to remain present with it. What dissolves fear is not courage, but understanding. The depths are not hostile, they are simply honest. The inner earth does not reveal itself all at once. It unfolds in layers, just like the planet itself. Rushing destabilizes. Patience integrates. This is why ancient initiations lasted years, not moments. Depth matures slowly because it restructures the whole being. To enter the inner world safely is to abandon the need for spectacle. The most profound revelations arrive quietly, almost disappointingly at first. But they change perception permanently. Once seen, the surface world can never fully deceive you again. The final descent awaits, not into darkness, but into recognition. What waits at the center is not foreign. It is what has always been holding you together. At the deepest point of the descent, nearly everyone encounters the same fear. Not terror, not monsters, but emptiness. A vast stillness where the familiar structures of identity dissolve. This moment has been misunderstood for centuries, labeled as annihilation, nihilism, or loss. But the ancients knew better. What appears empty to the surface mind is fullness to awareness. The fear of emptiness exists because the ego equates itself with meaning. When identity loosens, the mind panics, assuming something essential is being erased. But what is actually dissolving is noise, conditioning, fragmentation. The core feels empty only because it is unobstructed. It does not shout. It does not perform. It simply is. Ancient traditions describe the center as silent, radiant, and self-sustaining. Not a void, but a womb. Not absence, but origin. The hollow earth's inner sun was never fire, it was coherence. A state of awareness so unified that it feels unfamiliar to a consciousness accustomed to division. This is why the core cannot be grasped. It cannot be possessed, named, or turned into belief. The moment you try to define it, you move away from it. The core is recognized through resonance, not concept. You know you are near it when striving stops and presence deepens. Those who reach this point often believe they have failed because nothing spectacular happens. No visions, no voices, no proclamations, and yet everything shifts. Perception reorganizes. Fear loosens its grip. The need for external validation fades. The surface world continues, but it no longer owns you. The Gnostics called this state remembrance. Not because something new was discovered, but because something ancient was recovered. The divine spark was never dormant, it was buried under distraction. When the layers fall away, what remains feels startlingly familiar. The hollow earth myth insisted on this truth long before language could explain it. The center of being is not chaos. It is order, not imposed order, but natural alignment. This is why those who touch the core return with clarity rather than dogma. To fear emptiness is to misunderstand depth. The core does not take from you, it gives you back to yourself. And once this is known, the surface world can never fully imprison consciousness again. You were never meant to escape the world. You were meant to see through it. The hollow earth was never a destination, it was a direction. A reminder that truth does not descend from authority, scripture, or sky, but rises from within when the layers of forgetting fall away. Ancient myths did not exist to entertain primitive minds. They existed to preserve wisdom during ages when direct transmission was impossible. The hollow earth survived because humanity would need it again, when surface narratives became unbearable and depth became necessary. This journey was never about belief, it was about orientation. Once you understand that descent is not failure but initiation, everything changes. Struggle gains meaning, silence gains value, darkness loses its threat. You stop chasing transcendence and begin cultivating integration. The earth beneath your feet mirrors the architecture of your being. Layers, pressure, memory, fire, light. What you once thought was hidden from you has been waiting patiently, undisturbed by history, untouched by ideology. The inner world does not age, it does not argue, it remembers. This is why no system can give you what the inner world reveals. No institution can mediate what is already present. The map was never external. It was encoded in story, so you would not forget how to read yourself. The return to inner cosmology is not a trend. It is a correction. Humanity is remembering how to go inward again, not through fantasy, but through honesty. Not through escape, but through presence. The hollow earth is not opening beneath the planet. It is opening within the human psyche. If something in this journey resonated, it is because you already knew it. Recognition always precedes understanding. The call you feel is not curiosity, it is memory. If you're ready to continue exploring these forgotten inner worlds, to decode the myths that were never meant to be literal, but always meant to be lived, stay connected. Like this video, share what resonated in the comments, and subscribe to Path to Nirvana for deeper journeys into Gnostic wisdom, inner cosmology, and remembrance of what you have always been. The truth was never above you, it was never outside you, it has always been below, waiting to be remembered.